If you've ever wondered why some people seem to accelerate in life while others remain stuck, despite working just as hard or harder, you're not alone. We've all been conditioned to believe that success follows a linear path. Work hard, stay consistent, and eventually you'll be rewarded. But what if that's only half the truth? What if everything you've been taught about personal growth, achievement, and mastery has left out the most critical piece? This isn't another shallow motivational talk. This is a journey into the real mechanics behind success, where psychology, mindset, systems, and discipline converge in ways most people never realize. This is the behind-the-scenes truth that separates the top 1% from everyone else. And it starts with something surprisingly simple. Understanding that your current limitations aren't the problem. They're the beginning. The real obstacle is your relationship with discomfort, your tolerance for chaos, and how well you've trained yourself to keep moving even when clarity disappears. Because clarity, as it turns out, is not the starting point. It's the byproduct of movement. And once you grasp that, everything else changes. The greatest misconception people hold is that transformation begins when they feel ready. They wait for the motivation, the inspiration, the confidence to begin the journey. But readiness is a myth. The truth is, no one starts with confidence. No one starts knowing all the answers. Every person who has achieved anything worthwhile has done so while swimming in self-doubt, stumbling through uncertainty, and battling the voice inside that says, "You're not good enough." We're led to believe that the most successful people are fearless and driven by some superhuman willpower. But in reality, what they've mastered is not fearlessness, but action in spite of fear. They don't rely on motivation. They build systems that carry them when motivation dies, which it always does. This is the core principle most people overlook. Sustainable success isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. It's about doing the work even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. And that consistency is forged not in the moments of inspiration, but in the trenches, when nothing feels exciting, when no one is watching, when progress is invisible. At the heart of this system lies the concept of identity-based habits. This idea isn't new, but it's rarely understood in its full power. People often focus on goals: lose weight, make more money, build a business. But goals are outcomes, not systems. What drives lasting change is shifting the way you see yourself. When you go from trying to build a habit to embodying the identity of someone who already possesses it, everything shifts. It's the difference between saying, "I'm trying to write every day," versus "I'm a writer." One is fragile and conditional, the other is rooted in identity. The brain is constantly seeking consistency between your beliefs and your actions. So when you begin to act as if you are already the person you're trying to become, your mind starts closing that gap. And yes, at first it feels fake. It feels like you're pretending. But that's not imposter syndrome. That's the process of rewiring your identity. Real change happens when your habits are no longer something you do, but a reflection of who you are. And that shift doesn't begin with results. It begins with repetition. And repetition, by its nature, is boring. That's what makes it powerful. Most people never realize how much of mastery is hidden in monotony. They crave novelty. They want the next hack, the new secret, the exciting leap forward. But mastery doesn't live there. Mastery lives in repetition, refinement, and patience. The gym session that feels pointless. The paragraph you rewrite for the 5th time. The conversation you rehearse until it's seamless. The truth no one likes to hear is this: boredom is the cost of greatness. And those who achieve extraordinary things are not the ones who feel the most inspired, but the ones who are most willing to show up when the process feels dull. They build rituals. They embrace predictability. They understand that the days where nothing seems to change are the ones that compound. They stop chasing intensity and start respecting momentum. Because momentum, not motivation, is the real engine of progress. And momentum doesn't require breakthroughs. It requires showing up, stacking the bricks, and trusting that the wall will appear. But to show up consistently, you must protect your attention. In the age of noise, attention is your greatest asset and your most vulnerable weakness. Every notification, every distraction, every dopamine spike is designed to hijack your focus and drain your energy before you've even done the work. Success in today's world is no longer about talent alone. It's about attention management. The ability to create deep, uninterrupted time for focused effort is now a superpower. And it's not accidental. It's designed. High performers don't leave their focus to chance. They engineer their environment. They remove friction. They build systems that make the right action easier and the wrong one harder. They treat their workspace like a sacred arena because they understand that distraction is not just a nuisance. It's a cost. Every moment spent switching contexts, chasing dopamine, or avoiding discomfort is a moment stolen from your future self. So the question isn't, how do I stay motivated? The question is, what is making it hard for me to focus? And how do I eliminate it? Because until you control your environment controls you. And once you've built the foundation of focus, repetition, and identity, the next phase is even more uncomfortable. Deliberate discomfort. Growth doesn't come from doing what's hard once. It comes from intentionally placing yourself in environments that force adaptation. Whether that's a brutal feedback session, a cold shower, a public performance, or a new skill that feels like starting from zero, the principle is the same. Stress causes adaptation. The body grows under resistance. The mind sharpens under pressure. And yet most people spend their lives avoiding discomfort, when discomfort is the gatekeeper of all growth. Those who understand this don't just tolerate discomfort, they seek it. They romanticize challenge. They choose the hard thing, not because they enjoy pain, but because they understand that struggle is the soil where strength is grown. They don't wait for courage, they build it. They don't fear failure, they study it. They know that every failure is feedback. Every rejection is redirection. Every stumble is a signal. And the only way forward is through, not around, not above, through. And still, perhaps the most underrated force of transformation is patience. We live in an age of urgency. Results are expected instantly. Progress must be visible. But real growth isn't Instagrammable. It's quiet, invisible, often unrewarded. And it takes time, longer than you think, longer than you want. But that's not a flaw. That's the feature. Because what you build slowly, you build deeply. And what you build deeply cannot be taken. It becomes who you are. And so the final painful truth is this. You can't cheat the process. You can't speed past the struggle. You can't skip the seasons of doubt, boredom, and resistance. But if you can learn to love them, or at least coexist with them, you unlock a kind of momentum that doesn't need permission. You become unstoppable, not because of raw talent or perfect timing, but because you have embraced the truth that almost no one else is willing to accept, that success is not found in intensity, inspiration, or even information. It's found in the day you stop negotiating with your excuses and start acting like the person you want to become. Now that we've stripped away the illusions of overnight success, it's time to face the deeper truth. Most people are not held back by a lack of resources, time, or talent, but by the quiet, persistent weight of mental friction. It's the hesitation before starting, the loop of overthinking, the endless second-guessing that drains momentum before the first step is ever taken. We call it procrastination, but that's too soft a word for what it really is. Internal resistance. It's the invisible gravity pulling you away from action, convincing you to wait, to prepare a little more, to do it later. But what few people understand is that this resistance isn't a signal to stop. It's proof that you're on the right path. Resistance shows up most when the work matters. It doesn't appear when you scroll mindlessly or binge-watch distractions. It rises when you confront your edge. And the key is not to eliminate resistance. That's impossible. But to learn how to move with it, to act while feeling it, and to recognize that the discomfort of starting is always smaller than the regret of staying still. There's a reason people sabotage themselves when they're on the edge of breakthrough. The closer you get to the work that matters, the louder the noise becomes. Doubt grows, excuses multiply, the mind panics. It whispers lies, that you're not ready, that this isn't the right time, that you'll fail and be exposed. But what if that fear isn't a sign of danger, but a signal of alignment? What if the anxiety you feel before pressing publish, before stepping on stage, before launching your product, isn't a problem to solve, but proof that you're doing something that matters? This is where most people turn back. They look for comfort instead of truth. But the few who push through, the ones who feel the fear and do it anyway, begin to understand a new law of performance. That confidence is not the prerequisite for action, it's the reward. Action first, courage follows. And every time you cross that line between avoidance and effort, you build a version of yourself who trusts their own ability to act, not despite the fear, but because of it. And yet there's another trap that derails even the most ambitious, the addiction to learning. Yes, learning, information, strategies, tools, insights. There's never been a time when knowledge was so abundant and yet execution so rare. The world is drowning in content, but starving for commitment. We consume endlessly, believing that learning more will protect us from the risk of failure. But here's the paradox. Consuming without applying is a form of self-sabotage. It feels productive, but it's passive. It soothes the ego without strengthening the character. You scroll through advice on discipline while avoiding the very task that would build it. You save videos on focus while being completely distracted. You chase ideas instead of results. And it's not because you don't care, it's because your mind has been trained to associate movement with progress, even when that movement is just in circles. The cure? Brutal simplicity. Pick one thing, execute it fully. Stop gathering and start building. Information is only power when it's translated into behavior. Otherwise, it becomes intellectual clutter. Knowledge hoarded but never used. The truth is, the most powerful people in the world are not the ones with the most ideas. They're the ones who act on the few that matter. They don't chase every opportunity. They don't dilute their energy across 10 unfinished projects. They commit. They close doors. They simplify. Because they understand that focus isn't about doing more. It's about doing less, better. This runs counter to everything modern life teaches you. You're told to hustle, to grind, to keep your options open. But that mentality is a recipe for mediocrity. Excellence requires sacrifice. It requires saying no to almost everything so that the yes you give is total. That's what creates depth. That's what separates the dabbler from the master. So the question isn't, what else can I do? It's what must I let go of so I can give my full self to the work that matters most? If you're overwhelmed, unfocused, burnt out, it's not because you're doing too little, it's because you're scattered. Clarity is born from constraint. Momentum is born from discipline. And greatness is born from subtraction. Of course, this kind of sustained discipline isn't natural. It has to be designed. Your environment, your routines, your energy, all of it must be architected intentionally. Most people try to use willpower to fight their way through chaos, but willpower is a finite resource. Systems are not, and systems don't need to be complex to work. They just need to reduce friction. The fewer decisions you have to make, the more energy you preserve for the work that matters. That's why rituals are so powerful. When you wake up and your morning routine is automated, when your workspace is ready, when distractions are locked out by design, not discipline, you free yourself to go deep. The world's most consistent performers have rituals, not because they're robotic, but because they understand that spontaneity is the enemy of consistency. They don't trust motivation, they trust process. And the process protects them from the chaos of mood. It creates a foundation so they can perform even when they don't feel like it. Because discipline isn't about suffering, it's about structure. And structure is freedom. But even with structure, you will hit walls. You will burn out. You will question the entire point of the journey. That's where emotional endurance comes in. The ability to continue not just through discomfort, but through disillusionment. You will have seasons where the results don't match the effort, where the vision fades, where nothing seems to be working. Most people quit here, not because they're weak, but because no one taught them that these seasons are inevitable. They're not signs of failure, they're signs of process. Growth isn't linear, mastery isn't exponential. It's unpredictable, messy, and often invisible. That's why patience isn't passive, it's active resilience. It's the discipline of belief, the willingness to keep going without applause, without certainty, without proof. It's holding the vision even when your reality looks nothing like it. And the people who make it, the ones who eventually break through, aren't the ones with the easiest path. They're the ones who learn how to keep their fire lit even in the dark. They build endurance, not just physical but emotional, not just mental but spiritual. That endurance is what allows them to move from chasing goals to building legacy. Because goals are about what you can achieve. Legacy is about who you become. And to become someone capable of building a life that matters, one that outlives applause, one that reshapes the world around you, you must go beyond performance. You must lead yourself. This is the final shift. From doing the work to becoming the work. From checking boxes to embodying principles. You stop looking for hacks and shortcuts and begin crafting a life designed for alignment. You stop comparing your timeline to others and start walking at the pace of your own truth. You stop needing external permission and start trusting internal conviction. You evolve from being productive to being purposeful. And everything changes, not because the world has gotten easier, but because you have gotten clearer, stronger, and more anchored. You've stopped playing small. You've stopped negotiating your worth. You've decided fully, finally, unapologetically, to become the person only you were meant to be. What separates the few who ascend to greatness from the millions who remain stuck in cycles of mediocrity isn't superior genetics, luck, or intelligence. It's the rare willingness to live intentionally, to stand in the tension between who they are and who they're becoming without needing immediate relief or distraction. Most people build their lives reactively. They chase goals based on comparison, make decisions based on fear, and numb discomfort with constant consumption. They drift, not because they're lazy, but because drifting is easier than deciding. Deciding means taking ownership. It means taking responsibility, not just for your actions, but for your mindset, your energy, your time, and the way you show up every single day, even when no one's watching. Ownership is terrifying because it removes excuses. It strips away the ability to blame the economy, your childhood, your circumstances, or the people around you. But it's also the most powerful moment of your life. The moment you stop outsourcing your power. The moment you realize that while you may not be at fault for where you started, you are responsible for where you're going. And from that realization, everything can begin again, on your terms. True ownership transforms every dimension of life because it forces clarity. You stop operating on autopilot. You stop wasting time on things that don't align with who you want to become. You no longer settle for being busy as a badge of honor. You begin measuring progress not by how full your calendar is, but by how aligned your actions are with your values. You start asking harder questions. Why am I doing this? Who am I becoming through this? Is this helping me evolve or just helping me escape discomfort? Most people are terrified of this kind of reflection because it inevitably reveals misalignment. And misalignment is uncomfortable. It reveals that the job you're in might be stable, but it's suffocating. That the relationship might be familiar, but it's draining your spirit. That your habits are designed not for growth, but for distraction. But discomfort is the beginning of awareness, and awareness is the beginning of power. Once you become conscious of the ways you're betraying yourself for comfort, approval, or safety, you cannot unsee it. And though it hurts, it's a sacred pain. The pain of awakening, the pain of finally seeing your life clearly. And once you see it, you have two options. Change it or live every day knowing you didn't. It's in that space between realization and action that most people get stuck. They see the changes they need to make, but they hesitate. Not because they're unsure, but because they're afraid of losing what's familiar. The brain clings to the known, even when the known is killing you slowly. The job, the pattern, the identity, even if it's broken, at least it's predictable. Change requires loss, and loss requires grief. What no one tells you is that growth always begins with a kind of death. The death of an old identity, the collapse of an old belief system, the letting go of a version of yourself you've outgrown. And that's why so many people sabotage their transformation, because evolution demands you leave something behind. And the fear of what you'll lose often feels louder than the promise of what you'll gain. But every transformation is built on this exact paradox. You must leap before you see the net. You must walk away from the life that no longer fits before the new one has fully arrived. That's not weakness. That's courage. That's the raw, terrifying moment of reinvention. And those who embrace it begin to experience a freedom that most people never taste. Not the freedom to escape life, but the freedom to create it. But creating a new life doesn't begin with vision boards or wishful thinking. It begins with standards. Your life rises and falls to the level of what you're willing to tolerate. If you tolerate inconsistency, excuses, shallow relationships, or weak boundaries, you will continue to experience a reality that reflects those standards. But when you raise your standards, when you decide that mediocrity is no longer acceptable, that energy leaks will no longer be ignored, that your time and focus are sacred, you begin to vibrate at a different frequency. You stop begging people to understand your growth. You stop explaining your standards. You begin attracting experiences, people, and opportunities that match your new energy. And yes, some people will fall away. Some habits will no longer fit. Some spaces will begin to feel foreign. That's the cost of evolution. The more you grow, the more you'll outgrow. And while that shedding process is painful, it's also liberating. Because the more authentic you become, the less tolerance you have for anything that requires you to shrink, perform, or betray yourself. Yet setting standards isn't about perfection, it's about alignment. It's not about controlling every outcome, but about ensuring that your actions reflect your values, your boundaries reflect your worth, and your time reflects your priorities. High standards are not rigid rules. They are reminders of your potential. They're the guardrails that keep you from drifting back into default mode. And they are enforced not just through discipline, but through self-respect. You stop tolerating chaos not because it's wrong, but because you finally believe you deserve peace. You stop entertaining dysfunction not because you're better than others, but because you've healed enough to recognize your own patterns. And healing, real healing, isn't loud. It's quiet. It looks like not responding to the same triggers, not seeking the same validation, not needing the same drama to feel alive. Healing is when peace becomes more familiar than chaos, when solitude becomes more nourishing than distraction, when discipline becomes a form of self-love rather than self-punishment. And from that healed place, you begin to build not just success, but a life that actually feels good to live. And still, one of the most radical forms of self-mastery is emotional regulation. Because let's be honest, talent is everywhere, but the ability to manage your state in the face of adversity is rare. Anyone can act strong when things are easy. Anyone can be disciplined when life is convenient. But the ones who rise are those who can stay grounded when everything is falling apart, who can breathe through panic, respond rather than react, maintain clarity in chaos. This isn't just about mindfulness or meditation, though those tools help. It's about understanding that your emotions are not instructions. They're information. They're not threats. They're signals. Anger reveals where your boundaries are being violated. Anxiety reveals where your values are being neglected. Jealousy reveals what you desire but are denying yourself. Sadness reveals what you need to grieve. When you learn to listen to your emotions instead of suppressing them or being controlled by them, you begin to integrate all parts of yourself. You stop pretending to be strong by avoiding your feelings and start becoming strong by honoring them. And that emotional maturity is what allows you to lead, not just others, but yourself. Because at some point, leadership becomes inevitable. Not because you asked for it, but because you've become someone who others naturally look to. Your clarity becomes a mirror. Your integrity becomes a compass. Your consistency becomes contagious. And leadership isn't about titles. It's about influence. And influence isn't about how many people follow you. It's about how deeply you live your truth. The most magnetic people aren't the loudest or the most visible. They're the most aligned. Their words match their actions. Their energy matches their message. Their presence gives permission for others to rise. And that kind of leadership starts internally. It starts when you stop outsourcing your power to trends, opinions, or external metrics. When you realize that your worth was never up for debate, that your vision doesn't require validation, that your path doesn't need to be popular, it just needs to be real. And the more authentic you become, the more impact you make. not through force, but through frequency. You don't need to convince anymore. You simply embody. And embodiment is the loudest message you'll ever send. The moment you begin embodying your truth, not merely speaking it, not rehearsing it behind closed doors, but living it out loud with unwavering clarity, is the moment the world begins to rearrange itself around your presence. People will start responding to you differently, not because you've changed the words you say, but because the frequency beneath your words has shifted. There is a certain undeniable energy that emanates from someone who is no longer negotiating their identity, someone who has stopped asking for permission to exist in the fullness of their truth. This energy cannot be faked or fabricated. It's forged through fire, through the countless moments of doubt, hesitation, and inner war that were not broadcast on social media, not seen by the world, not validated by applause. It's the quiet resilience of choosing alignment over approval, purpose over performance, and depth over popularity. This is the place where many never arrive, not because they lack capacity, but because they fear the cost. Because to truly live in your power, you must be willing to disappoint those who benefited from your silence, your conformity, and your smallness. And that is not an easy price to pay, but it is the only path to liberation. You cannot live a free life while remaining addicted to being understood. The deeper you go into your own becoming, the less explainable you become to the masses. People will misinterpret your silence as arrogance, your solitude as depression, your detachment as disinterest. They will project their discomfort with your evolution onto your character, labeling you as distant, difficult, or changed, as though growth were a betrayal, as though becoming more of yourself were something to apologize for. But understand this: you were not born to be easily categorized. You are not a soundbite. You are not a brand. You are not here to be digestible to the lowest common denominator. You are here to expand into a version of yourself that is so honest, so rare, and so deeply rooted in inner truth that it ruptures the fragile illusions that others have built around what's acceptable, what's safe, what's normal. And yes, that will make some uncomfortable. Yes, it will cost you proximity to certain people and places that no longer fit the rhythm of your becoming. But what you gain in return is far greater: the unshakable peace of no longer living a performance, the ability to look yourself in the mirror without shame, without distortion, without regret. In this place, your relationship with time begins to shift. You stop living like you have forever. You begin to feel the urgency, not the anxious, frantic kind, but the sacred, intentional kind. You realize that every day is a vote for the life you're creating, and that wasted days become wasted decades when you aren't conscious of your direction. You begin to honor the hours, not just fill them. You no longer treat your energy as infinite. You stop leaking time into dead conversations, false obligations, and empty tasks that don't contribute to your soul's expansion. You no longer glorify exhaustion. You stop confusing being drained with being valuable. You start protecting your energy the way an elite athlete protects their body, not because you're fragile, but because you've finally realized your energy is your currency. You begin living in alignment with your values, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's inconvenient, because the gap between who you say you are and how you actually live becomes too uncomfortable to ignore. You begin to experience integrity not as a moral concept, but as a visceral sensation. You can feel it in your body when something is off. You can sense when a yes is betraying your no. And in that awareness, you start making micro decisions that restore your congruence, that rewire your nervous system for safety and truth, that liberate you from the performance of being on and usher you into the ease of simply being real. And with that realness comes clarity, a piercing, often uncomfortable clarity, clarity that reveals the dead weight you've been carrying, not just in your external world, but in your psyche. Outdated narratives about your worth, scripts about what success should look like, emotional contracts you signed with people who never honored your growth, the voices in your head that sound like your own but were planted by others, voices that told you to stay quiet, stay small, stay manageable. But now as you awaken, those voices begin to lose their power. You no longer believe everything you think. You start interrogating your inner dialogue the way you would interrogate a manipulative stranger. Is this true? Is this helpful? Is this voice trying to protect me or control me? And that questioning doesn't make you unstable. It makes you sovereign. You are no longer a prisoner of inherited beliefs. You are the author now. And authors don't just edit, they delete entire chapters when necessary. They rework the plot. They rewrite the protagonist from passive to powerful. And most importantly, they keep writing even when they don't know how the story ends. Because they trust the arc. They trust that truth will reveal itself on the other side of boldness. And that trust, that surrender to the process, is what allows you to keep showing up even when the outcomes are uncertain. But the deepest trust is not in the process. It's in yourself. Trusting that you can handle the consequences of your clarity. That you can hold the discomfort of evolution without self-abandonment. That you can lose what isn't aligned and still know that nothing real is ever truly lost. Trusting yourself means refusing to dilute your essence just to maintain harmony. It means letting the chips fall where they may, socially, professionally, relationally, because you've chosen truth over belonging. And in doing so, paradoxically, you begin to find true belonging for the first time. Not in a crowd, but in yourself, in your solitude, in your ability to sit with your own presence without the need for validation or distraction, in your ability to disappoint others without collapsing into guilt, in your ability to stand firm in your choices without endless explanation. This is the deepest form of maturity, to no longer need consensus to move forward, to trust the internal yes over the external applause, to move in silence not because you're hiding, but because your frequency has become too potent for surface-level conversations. And while others are still chasing relevance, you're building resonance. Relevance fades, resonance echoes. And that resonance, your unique energetic fingerprint, begins to shape not just your life, but your impact. You stop asking, what do I want to do? And start asking, what do I want to embody? Because when you embody your values, your actions become inevitable. You stop forcing discipline. You stop outsourcing motivation. Your life becomes a byproduct of who you are, not what you're trying to become. This is embodiment, the seamless integration of knowing, doing, and being. It's the point where your identity aligns so deeply with your purpose that discipline becomes an act of devotion. Where your habits aren't tasks, they're rituals. Where your goals aren't about proving, they're about expressing. You don't need to convince the world of your worth because your very existence becomes the evidence. And that evidence ripples outward, not through marketing, but through magnetism. People feel it. They feel the integrity, the congruence, the depth, and they're drawn not to what you have, but to who you are. You become the message. You become the medicine, not by preaching, but by becoming impossible to ignore. As you continue to embody your truth, something profoundly paradoxical begins to occur. You become both more visible and more untouchable, not in the superficial sense of being elevated or idolized, but in the energetic sense of becoming unreachable by the forces that once controlled you. You are no longer swayed by the need to explain yourself, to prove your worth, or to shrink into spaces that can't hold your depth. You become immune to the manipulations of guilt and shame that once kept you tethered to people, places, and patterns that served only your stagnation. The version of you that once apologized for being too intense, too emotional, too ambitious, too honest, that version quietly dies. And in its place emerges a grounded, unapologetic presence that does not need to defend its existence. There is no need for spectacle, no need for rebellion, no need to fight for space. You become the space. And from this new place of self-possession, you begin to experience life in a radically different way. Not as something to conquer, but as something to co-create. And this co-creation is not passive. It's not about manifesting through mantras or vision boards alone. It's about radical alignment. It's about making decisions that match the vibration of the life you say you want. It's about dismantling every habit, every narrative, every excuse that contradicts the future you're building. Because the truth is, you are always manifesting, whether consciously or not. Every belief you carry, every emotion you suppress, every choice you make, it all becomes data in the algorithm of your reality. If you constantly say you want peace, but continue entertaining chaos, the universe is not confused. You are. If you say you want depth, but continue choosing distraction, you are manifesting contradiction. And contradiction is the breeding ground of self-sabotage. Because deep down, the part of you that's still addicted to your wounds will always resist the healing that threatens to make them obsolete. The part of you that finds identity in your struggle will resist the joy that renders it irrelevant. That's why healing isn't just a feel-good journey. It's a confrontation. A confrontation with the parts of you that are loyal to pain, loyal to drama, loyal to being the underdog, because that role feels safer than being fully powerful, fully visible, and fully responsible for your joy. Stepping into that level of responsibility requires that you stop asking for signs and start becoming one, that you stop waiting for alignment and start generating it, that you stop outsourcing your clarity to coaches, friends, or mentors, and begin listening to the only voice that truly knows your path, your own. That voice, however, has likely been buried beneath layers of noise. The noise of social conditioning, the noise of expectations, the noise of performance. And to hear it clearly again, you must be willing to withdraw, not as an escape, but as a return to inner stillness, a return to sovereignty. This withdrawal often looks like disappearing, like becoming less available, less reactive, less performative. And in a world obsessed with constant engagement, your silence will be misunderstood. People will assume something is wrong. They'll assume you've fallen off. But what they don't realize is that this is where you're truly rising, inwardly, quietly, irrevocably. Because real growth is rarely dramatic. It's a slow, deliberate unbecoming of everything you are not. It's a stripping away, not an adding on. And what's left in that emptiness is not lack. It's space. Space for truth to breathe, space for alignment to emerge, space for the next version of you to root itself, not in fantasy, but in embodied reality. As you build this new reality, you start realizing that not everyone can come with you. And that's not bitterness, it's biology. Not everyone is wired to hold the frequency of where you're going. Not because they're bad, not because they're beneath you, but because your evolution forces a mirror they're not ready to look into. Your presence starts disrupting their comfort. Your consistency challenges their excuses. Your peace confronts their chaos. And often they will try to pull you back, not consciously, but energetically. They will bait you with the same arguments, the same dynamics, the same patterns, just to see if you'll still bite. And when you don't, they will call you cold, distant, changed. But that's okay, because you have changed. You've shifted from reaction to intention, from proving to presence, from surviving to leading. And leadership requires discernment. It requires that you stop negotiating your standards just to maintain old bonds. It requires you to make peace with being misunderstood. And this is where many fall off, because the craving to be liked, loved, or approved of is deeply primal. But true power comes when you stop trying to be liked and start choosing to be real. When you no longer water yourself down to fit into containers you've outgrown. And the more real you become, the less you tolerate anything inauthentic. You begin to develop an energetic allergy to gossip, small talk, performative relationships, and environments where depth is punished and conformity is rewarded. You begin to gravitate toward people who feel like truth, not just talk about it. People who can hold space for silence. People who are not intimidated by your bigness or your stillness. People who are not competing, comparing, or projecting, but creating. This is your new tribe, not defined by proximity, but by frequency. Not by how long you've known each other, but by how deeply you can be seen, heard, and met. And when you find these people, it's not fireworks, it's recognition. It's a soul-level exhale, a quiet knowing that says, I don't have to perform here. And in those spaces, growth accelerates, because there is nothing more catalytic than being witnessed in your wholeness, no mask, no filter, just truth meeting truth. These are the relationships that elevate you, not by force, but by reflection, not by advice, but by alignment. But to receive those connections, you must first become them. You must become the space you wish to find. You must embody the values you crave in others. You must show up in the world with the same integrity, presence, and depth that you're asking for. This is the part most people skip. They want aligned relationships without doing the inner work. They want deep partnerships without clearing the wounds that keep attracting superficial ones. But your external relationships will always mirror your internal one. If you're dishonest with yourself, you will tolerate dishonesty in others. If you abandon your own needs, you will attract people who do the same. If you suppress your truth, you will call in dynamics where your voice is silenced. But as you reclaim your inner truth, your external world begins to restructure. Not overnight, not without grief, but with precision, and that restructuring is sacred. It's not chaos, it's order. It's not rejection, it's redirection. Every closed door is a curriculum. Every goodbye is an initiation. And every ending is simply clearing space for the new, the true, the deeply aligned. Because when you begin to live from alignment, your entire definition of success begins to evolve. Success is no longer about accumulation. It's about coherence. It's about waking up in the morning and feeling at home in your life. It's about moving through the world without betraying yourself. It's about choosing integrity over image, fulfillment over fame, and depth over applause. It's about knowing that your legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you embody while you're here. It's how deeply you loved, how courageously you lived, how honestly you spoke, and how unapologetically you showed up for your truth. And that kind of legacy doesn't require followers, fortune, or fanfare. It only requires presence, radical, relentless presence. The kind of presence that changes rooms without saying a word, that heals without preaching, that leads without dominating, that simply exists, and through its existence invites others into their own remembering, into their own power, into their own truth. This is the power of embodiment. This is the power of presence. And this is the life you came here to live. At some point in your evolution, you no longer chase the future in the way you once did. Not because you've given up on dreaming, but because you've realized that your power isn't in projecting forward. It's in anchoring deeper into the now. The future is not a place you arrive at. It's a reality you calibrate to through your present alignment. And when you begin to live like that, you stop obsessing over the next milestone, the next breakthrough, the next external win. You begin to understand that every next level of your life is encoded inside this moment. Not tomorrow, not next year, not when circumstances improve or people change. Right here, right now, in the texture of this breath, this decision, this choice to rise or retreat. This is where the transformation lives. Not in theory, not in abstraction, but in practice. In how you show up when no one is watching. In how you treat your own dreams when they're still invisible. In how you speak to yourself when the noise dies down and the mirrors fade. That is the arena where the real shifts occur. Because mastery isn't built in the spotlight. It's built in solitude, repetition, and quiet integrity. And it's in that solitude that you begin to meet the deeper dimensions of yourself. The parts that don't perform, don't pose, don't hustle to be seen. The parts that don't care about metrics or optics, but about meaning. You meet the artist within you who creates for the joy of creating, not for applause. You meet the lover within you who doesn't just want romance, but wants sacred intimacy, the kind that demands vulnerability, presence, and emotional exposure. You meet the leader within you who doesn't lead to be followed, but leads to illuminate, to lift, to liberate. And you begin to realize that all these versions of you were never gone. They were simply buried beneath layers of noise, fear, and false identity. As you reconnect with them, you no longer seek permission to be whole. You stop compartmentalizing your identity. Professional here, spiritual there, creative over there. You integrate, you unify. You become one congruent frequency that no longer fractures itself to be palatable. And in that unity, you find peace. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you no longer abandon yourself to chase an illusion of perfection. But integration is not a linear process. It is cyclical, it is messy, It is nonlinear. It is a spiraling inward and a spiraling upward simultaneously. Some days you'll feel like you're soaring, others like you're unraveling. And both are valid. Both are sacred, because you cannot expand without shedding. You cannot rise without releasing. The path to embodiment is paved with the deaths of 1,000 false selves, and each death feels like loss, not because you're losing something real, but because your ego was attached to the role it played. The overachiever, the caretaker, the rebel, the fixer, the chameleon. Each identity served a purpose. Each one protected you in a different season. But what protected you then may now be what's preventing you. And the courage required to let go of these masks is immense, because beneath every mask is a vulnerability. The child who wasn't seen, the dream that was dismissed, the voice that was silenced. And healing requires that we not bypass these parts, but welcome them. Not with pity, but with reverence. Because they are not the obstacles, they are the portals. The portals through which our deeper wisdom, strength, and clarity emerge. And through those portals, you begin to reclaim something you may not have even realized you lost. Your innate wholeness. Not the kind of wholeness that comes from fixing, but from remembering. Remembering that nothing was ever missing, that your worth was never negotiable, that your light does not need validation to be real. And as you return to that remembrance, you stop looking for the world to affirm you. You stop needing success to prove your value. You stop needing love to validate your existence. Instead, everything you create becomes an overflow, not a pursuit. You no longer chase freedom because you found it within. You no longer chase clarity because you've become quiet enough to hear it. You no longer chase worthiness because you've made peace with who you are beyond all the labels, achievements, and roles. And this internal shift begins to express itself in your external life in subtle yet radical ways. You make decisions faster, not from impulse, but from inner knowing. You walk away from things that once held power over you, not out of spite, but out of alignment. You choose rest without guilt, boundaries without shame, solitude without fear. You no longer seek to escape your life. You begin to truly live it. And as you live it, you start to realize how much beauty you had previously overlooked, not because it wasn't there, but because you were too distracted by proving, performing, and perfecting. Now the beauty becomes obvious. It's in the breath, in the pause between moments, in the small rituals that anchor you. The first sip of coffee in silence, the sunlight streaming through your window, the sound of your own laughter echoing through an empty room. These are no longer background noise. They are sacred evidence of presence. You begin to romanticize your reality, not as an escape, but as an act of reverence. You stop waiting for some distant future to feel joy and begin curating it now in the texture of your daily existence. This doesn't mean you abandon ambition. It means your ambition is now rooted in gratitude, not lack. It means you create from fullness, not deficiency. It means your life becomes art, not because it's always beautiful, but because you are awake to its richness, its contrast, its depth. You are no longer asleep in your own story. And because you're awake, you begin to notice the things that once slid by unnoticed. The micro-truths, the subtle betrayals, the small compromises that, over time, drain your vitality. You start to catch them earlier. The email you don't actually want to send. The agreement you didn't mean to make. The conversation where you smiled but meant no. You begin to speak up, not louder, but sooner. You begin to make decisions before resentment builds. You begin to close loops before they drain your energy. You stop tolerating the things that make you sick, tired, and small, not because you're dramatic, but because you finally realize that your energy is sacred and how you spend it is your vote for the life you're choosing. And so you begin choosing with intention. You stop multitasking your life. You stop overbooking your peace. You begin to honor spaciousness as a strategy. You prioritize your nervous system over your to-do list. You understand that a regulated body is a creative one, that safety is the soil in which genius grows, and that your best ideas don't come when you're grinding, they come when you're grounded. And grounding doesn't always look like stillness. Sometimes it's movement, expression, creation. Sometimes it's walking away. Sometimes it's saying no. Sometimes it's letting the thing fall apart because holding it together costs more than it's worth. You begin to trust that falling apart is not failure. It's the beginning of a deeper reordering. You no longer cling to structures that stifle you. You no longer romanticize endurance over authenticity. You stop measuring strength by how much you can carry and start measuring it by how willing you are to let go. You begin to live lighter, not because life got easier, but because you got clearer. Clearer about what matters. Clearer about what you're no longer available for. Clearer about what alignment actually feels like. Not what it looks like on paper, but what it feels like in your body. And your body becomes your compass. Your inner yes becomes louder. Your no becomes sacred. Your instincts become undeniable. You stop overriding your intuition in favor of logic, because you've learned that logic is not always wise. It is merely conditioned. Intuition, however, is ancestral. It's primal. It's the voice of a self that remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. And the more you follow that voice, the more life begins to reflect your inner clarity. Synchronicities appear, not because magic is rare, but because you're finally aligned enough to notice. Opportunities come, not because you're chasing them, but because you've become magnetic to what matches your frequency. Resistance lessens, not because life stops challenging you, but because you stop resisting the lesson inside the challenge. You begin to welcome discomfort as a teacher. You stop fearing contrast. You understand that polarity is part of the creative process. And from that understanding, you no longer collapse when things don't go your way. You alchemize. You adapt. You transmute. You are no longer rigid. You are resilient. And resilience doesn't mean bouncing back. It means bending without breaking. It means expanding through adversity, not just surviving it. And that expansion becomes your new baseline. You don't return to old versions of yourself after each storm. You rise into new ones. Because every disruption becomes an initiation. Every chaos becomes a catalyst. Every challenge becomes a doorway, not to suffering, but to sovereignty. Eventually, you come to understand that healing is not just about fixing the wounds of your past. It's about remembering the truth of who you've always been beneath them. It's not about becoming someone new, but about returning to a version of yourself that existed before the world convinced you to doubt your light. And this return is not dramatic or loud. It's subtle and sacred. It happens in quiet decisions, in small moments of choosing differently, in the refusal to repeat patterns that once felt inescapable. It happens when you no longer choose chaos just because it's familiar. When you stop mistaking adrenaline for alignment, urgency for importance, and suffering for depth. It happens when you unlearn the belief that you have to earn your rest, justify your joy, or apologize for your wholeness. And this unlearning is not a simple task. It's a dismantling of years, sometimes generations, of conditioning. It's the peeling back of stories inherited through bloodlines and reinforced through repetition. Stories that said you had to work to be worthy, that love had to hurt to be real, that safety was something to be chased, not claimed. But now you begin to question those stories. You begin to ask, who would I be if I believed I was already enough? And that question becomes a portal, a key that unlocks parts of you long forgotten. You start noticing the subtle shifts, the way your body relaxes when you no longer feel the need to prove, the way your voice steadies when you speak your truth without expectation, the way your presence deepens when you stop trying to impress and instead choose to connect. And through these shifts, you begin to rewrite your internal narrative. You stop being the victim of your circumstances and become the author of your story. Not because life stops being hard, but because you stop outsourcing your power. You stop waiting for external permission to live fully. You begin living now, as is where you are, with what you have. And in doing so, you discover a new kind of freedom, the kind that isn't dependent on certainty, security, or control. A freedom born from presence, from trust, from the radical realization that you don't have to have it all figured out to be fully alive. That sometimes the greatest clarity comes not from answers, but from surrender. Not from control, but from courage. The courage to walk into the unknown, not because it's comfortable, but because it's real. And as you walk that path, the nature of your desires begins to change. You no longer crave surface-level validation or hollow achievements. You want depth, resonance, connection that doesn't require performance, success that doesn't cost your peace, joy that doesn't feel like a reward for suffering, but a birthright. And because your desires evolve, your decisions follow. You start building a life that feels good on the inside, even if it doesn't always look impressive from the outside. You stop living for the highlight reel and start honoring the moments that don't make it to social media. The early mornings, the late night conversations, the messy middles. You stop chasing image and start embodying essence. And as your life becomes more aligned with your soul, the noise of the world starts to fade. The opinions, the comparisons, the algorithms, they hold less weight. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've started caring more about what truly matters. You've started asking better questions. Not will they like me, but am I being honest? Not does this look successful, but does this feel true? Not what should I do, but what do I know in my bones? And this knowing, this embodied wisdom, becomes your new compass. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It simply lives in your body, waiting to be trusted. It speaks in sensations, in gut pulls, in the resonance or dissonance you feel around people, places, decisions. And the more you trust it, the clearer it becomes. You stop asking for signs and start becoming them. You stop chasing clarity through overthinking and begin cultivating it through embodiment. You learn that integration is the medicine, not accumulation of more information, more advice, more spiritual jargon. You don't need more tools. You need to use what you already have. You need to live the truth you already know. And that truth often requires difficult choices, the kind that unravel comfort but cultivate freedom. It requires you to walk away from people you love, but who cannot meet you, to leave environments that once felt like home, but now feel like cages, to risk being misunderstood in order to be fully seen. And yes, that path is lonely at times, but that loneliness is not emptiness. It is space. Space for what's real, space for what's next, space for who you're becoming. And who you're becoming is not a version crafted by external standards, but one sculpted by soul. Not a reaction to the world, but a response to your own longing. You become someone who doesn't just survive, but someone who creates, who imagines, who dares. Someone who doesn't shrink in the face of uncertainty, but rises to meet it with open hands and a grounded heart. Someone who doesn't just talk about love or truth or purpose, but lives it, breathes it, becomes it. And in becoming it, you become a mirror for others to remember themselves. You don't need to preach or persuade, you simply embody. You live with such clarity, such congruence, that your very presence becomes an invitation for others to rise, not through pressure, but through reflection, not through performance, but through authenticity. This is the new leadership. It's not about having all the answers. It's about holding the frequency of truth, even when it's inconvenient. It's about standing in integrity, even when it's lonely. It's about choosing alignment over approval, purpose over popularity, wholeness over hustle. And from that place, your impact becomes exponential, not because of scale, but because of depth. And that depth doesn't just transform your life, it transforms how you relate to everything around you. You stop consuming mindlessly and start creating intentionally. You stop reacting to the news and start responding to your inner world. You stop trying to fix people and start holding space for their evolution. You stop fearing pain and start trusting it as a messenger. Every experience becomes a teacher. Every moment becomes medicine. And life, in all its messiness, becomes sacred again. Not perfect, but precious. Not easy, but meaningful. You begin to see the divine not just in temples and rituals, but in traffic, in arguments, in laughter, in laundry. You stop separating the spiritual from the mundane and begin recognizing that every breath is a prayer, every choice a devotion. And from that recognition, reverence arises. Reverence for your body, for the earth, for the unseen intelligence weaving it all together, you begin to walk differently, speak differently, love differently. Not because you're trying to be enlightened, but because you're finally awake. And this awakening doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you more available to love everyone, including yourself. It softens your judgments, sharpens your discernment, and deepens your capacity for compassion. You stop needing people to agree with you in order to respect them. You stop needing people to change in order to love them. You realize that true love is not control, it is presence. It is seeing someone fully without trying to fix them. It is holding space for their process without making it about you. And this kind of love starts with you, with how you meet your own shadows, with how you hold yourself when you're grieving, doubting, spiraling, with how you celebrate yourself without guilt or apology, because the way you love yourself sets the tone for how you love the world. And if you are at war with your own heart, you will create conflict wherever you go. But if you are at peace within, you become a sanctuary for yourself, for others, for the world. And in that sanctuary, life begins to blossom, not in predictable ways, but in true ways, in ways that stretch you, surprise you, break you open, and put you back together stronger. You realize that fulfillment was never in the destination, but in the devotion, in the showing up, in the choosing again and again to live in alignment with your truth. And that truth becomes your North Star, not a rigid rule, but a living compass. It guides you, holds you, and challenges you to rise into who you were always meant to be. Not a watered-down version, not a convenient version, but the real, raw, radiant expression of your soul. And when you live like that, when you dare to live like that, you don't just change your life. You change the world around you, one moment, one breath, one bold decision at a time. There comes a moment, almost imperceptible at first, when you no longer feel the pull to prove yourself to anyone, not your past, not your critics, not even the version of you who once thought success looked a certain way. It's a quiet threshold, not marked by grand announcements or fireworks, but by an internal stillness that whispers, I am enough, even here. And when you cross that threshold, your entire relationship with life begins to shift. You no longer move from pressure, but from purpose. You no longer chase outcomes, but cultivate presence. The frantic hustle gives way to a grounded devotion. The incessant need to be seen gives way to a deeper desire to be real. And in this grounded state, you begin to meet your own life with reverence. You start honoring what's already here instead of obsessing over what's missing. You slow down not because you've given up, but because you've finally arrived. And from that place of arrival, everything becomes more vibrant. The way sunlight filters through your window, the way laughter fills a room, the way silence can hold you like a prayer. You stop rushing through your days and begin inhabiting them fully. You stop striving for meaning and start embodying it. Life stops being something you perform and becomes something you live. And when you live like that, deeply, honestly, unapologetically, you begin to see yourself clearly, not through the distorted lens of expectation, but through the sacred mirror of experience. You realize that the hardest parts of your journey were not detours, they were initiation. Every heartbreak refined your discernment. Every failure sharpened your focus. Every loss carved out space for deeper presence. You no longer curse the storms. You recognize them as the winds that carried you home. And this home is not a destination or a final achievement. It's a way of being, a returning to your essence, a reclamation of all the parts you once abandoned to fit into boxes too small for your soul. You pick up those parts gently, like sacred relics, dusting them off and placing them back inside you with reverence. The part that was too sensitive, the part that felt too much, the part that dared to dream, the part that questioned the rules. These are not your weaknesses, they are your keys. They are the maps back to your wholeness. And as you integrate them, you stop needing to shrink to make others comfortable. You stop muting your truth to avoid conflict. You stop dimming your joy to appear humble. You take up space, not in arrogance, but in authenticity, not to dominate, but to simply be. And your beingness becomes your superpower. In a world obsessed with doing, with proving, with producing, your capacity to simply be anchored, present, open, is revolutionary. You become the calm in the chaos, the clarity in the noise, the truth in a sea of pretense, not because you're trying to be special, but because you finally let go of trying altogether. You've let go of the performance, the pretense, the persona. What's left is real, and that realness is magnetic, not in a flashy way, but in a soulful way. People are drawn to you not because you have all the answers, but because your presence reminds them of something they forgot, that it's safe to be themselves, that they don't have to earn love or prove their worth or wear a mask to belong. Your authenticity gives them permission to drop theirs, and that is sacred work, not the kind that wins awards or goes viral, but the kind that shifts hearts, that changes rooms, that alters timelines. This is the ripple effect of living in alignment, not from ego, but from essence. And when you live from essence, your life takes on a different texture. The highs don't intoxicate you, and the lows don't destroy you. You are no longer ruled by circumstance because your center is internal. You stop outsourcing your peace to people who don't understand you or places that never felt like home. You carry your peace with you, like a flame that cannot be extinguished. And even when life gets hard, and it will, you don't collapse. You soften, you open, you stay. You learn to hold space for the messiness, not as a flaw to be fixed, but as a necessary part of the human experience. You learn to hold grief and gratitude in the same breath, to cry while laughing, to celebrate in the midst of uncertainty. You stop needing closure to find peace. You stop waiting for permission to move forward. You create your own rituals, your own endings, your own new beginnings. You become a sacred alchemist, transforming pain into wisdom, endings into rebirth, resistance into revelation. And that alchemy requires trust, not blind optimism, but radical trust. The kind of trust that says, even if I don't know what's next, I know who I am. The kind of trust that anchors you when the future is unclear and the path is foggy. The kind that allows you to make bold decisions, not because you're fearless, but because you've made peace with fear. You no longer need certainty to act. You no longer need consensus to believe. You trust your intuition, even when it defies logic. You trust your body, even when your mind is noisy. You trust your path, even when it diverges from the norm. And as you walk that path, your confidence deepens. Not the loud performative kind, but the quiet, embodied kind. The kind that doesn't need validation because it's rooted in truth. The kind that doesn't seek applause because it's fueled by purpose. The kind that knows I am here for a reason and I don't need to become anyone else to fulfill it. And in fulfilling that purpose, whatever form it takes, you start to realize that your life is not a linear climb or a predictable script. It's a living, breathing work of art. It's a poem being written in real time. It's a dance between surrender and intention, chaos and clarity, breaking and becoming. You stop measuring success by productivity and start measuring it by presence, by how deeply you love, by how fully you show up, by how gently you hold yourself and others. And from that new metric, you redefine everything, your relationships, your work, your goals. You no longer chase things that look good but feel hollow. You seek resonance. You prioritize peace. You protect your energy not because you're guarded, but because you're discerning. You know what drains you. You know what nourishes you, and you choose accordingly. Not from guilt, but from wisdom. This is what boundaries look like when they're rooted in self-respect. This is what leadership looks like when it's rooted in integrity. This is what love looks like when it's rooted in truth. And that love, raw, real, unconditional, becomes the thread that weaves it all together. Love for your path, even the parts you wouldn't have chosen. Love for your body, even in its imperfections. Love for your past selves, even when they didn't know better. Love for the people who couldn't stay, even as you bless their departure. Love for the unknown, even when it scares you. Because love, when it's not attached to outcome or ego, becomes your most powerful force. It expands you, softens you, strengthens you. It teaches you that vulnerability is not weakness, but courage. That forgiveness is not forgetting, but freedom. That joy is not frivolous, but sacred. And when you live from love, You begin to see the world differently. You see beauty in places others overlook. You see potential in what others discard. You see yourself not as separate from life, but as part of it, an extension of the same intelligence that grows flowers, stirs oceans, births stars, and that remembrance changes everything. It turns your daily life into a devotion, your breath into a prayer, your presence into a gift. You no longer strive to be perfect, you strive to be whole. And in your wholeness, you become a healing presence. Not because you have it all together, but because you're willing to be real. Because you've stopped performing and started embodying. Because you've stopped numbing and started feeling. Because you've stopped running and started returning to yourself, to your body, to the present moment. And this return is not a destination. It's a daily choice, a quiet rebellion against the noise of the world, a radical act of self-love, and it changes the way you live, the way you love, the way you lead. It changes the legacy you leave behind, not through wealth or fame, but through presence, through impact, through the invisible threads you weave by simply being who you are, fully and freely. There is a profound freedom that arises when you stop striving to be understood by everyone, when you stop contorting your truth into palatable shapes for others' comfort, when you finally release the exhausting need to explain your heart to those committed to misunderstanding it. In that liberation, a new kind of clarity emerges, a soul-level clarity that no longer seeks validation through consensus, but instead finds refuge in authenticity. You begin to realize that alignment doesn't always look like agreement, and that peace doesn't always require harmony with others, but harmony within. You learn to sit with the discomfort of being misread, misjudged, even misrepresented, because your truth no longer depends on being echoed to feel real. You become less reactive and more discerning, less about convincing and more about connecting. You begin conserving your energy like a sacred resource, no longer pouring it into debates that lead nowhere or into relationships that demand you shrink. Instead, you invest that energy into your own soil, your own roots, your own becoming. And in that soil, something ancient starts to stir. Something wild, something honest. It's not loud or flashy, but steady and deep. It's the emergence of your truest self, not the self you performed, but the self you preserved. The one that has always been watching quietly from within, waiting for permission to breathe freely. And when that version of you rises, unfiltered, unpolished, unafraid, life begins to rearrange around your new vibration. Some things fall away effortlessly, no longer in resonance with your deeper frequency. Friendships that once felt vital suddenly feel misaligned. Habits that once felt comforting now seem heavy. Goals that once lit you up now flicker with hollow ambition. But instead of panicking, you begin to understand. This is what evolution looks like. It's not a tidy process. It's a shedding, a grieving, a recalibration. It's sitting in the in-between, between who you were and who you're becoming, and trusting the emptiness to refine you. You stop fearing the void and start listening to it. Because in the stillness, you hear whispers you've ignored for years. The voice that says you don't have to keep proving your worth through your output. The voice that says your softness is strength. The voice that says your boundaries are sacred. The voice that says you're allowed to change your mind, to pivot, to begin again. And with every moment you honor that voice, your life becomes less of a performance and more of a practice. A practice in truth-telling, a practice in self-trust, a practice in courage, not the loud, heroic kind, but the quiet kind that shows up even when no one else sees it. And in that practice, you start noticing the quiet miracles of your life. Not the big, flashy wins, but the subtle shifts. The moments you speak up when you used to stay silent. The days you rest without guilt. The times you forgive yourself before anyone else does. These small, often invisible victories become the foundation of your inner peace. They mark the return to your own rhythm, your own pace, your own knowing. You stop trying to keep up with a timeline that was never yours to begin with. You stop measuring your worth against curated highlight reels. You stop gaslighting your own intuition just to fit into systems that were never built with your well-being in mind. And as you unplug from the noise, you begin to hear your own music. It might be unfamiliar at first, soft, slow, a little offbeat, but it's yours. It's the song of your soul, unedited and unapologetic. And the more you listen, the more natural it feels to dance to it. You stop needing choreography. You stop needing approval. You move how you move. You live how you live. And your life becomes art, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. That realness becomes your compass. Not rules, not expectations, not external approval, but the felt sense of yes in your body. You learn to trust that yes, even when it doesn't make sense on paper. Even when it leads you away from the known and into the uncertain. You trust it because you've tasted the cost of betraying yourself, and you're no longer willing to pay that price. You'd rather be misunderstood than misaligned. You'd rather start over than stay stuck. You'd rather walk alone in truth than be surrounded in pretense. And from that fierce devotion to self, your life begins to reflect back the integrity you've cultivated within. The people you attract are different, more resonant, more rooted, more real. The work you create carries a different frequency, more honest, more healing, more human. The way you show up in the world becomes a mirror for others to do the same. Not through preaching, but through presence. Not through force, but through example. You don't try to fix or save anyone. You simply stand in your truth, and in doing so, invite others to find their own. And the beauty of that ripple is that it requires no grand gestures. It's in how you hold space for a friend without needing to solve their pain. It's in how you honor your needs without apology. It's in how you speak truthfully, even when your voice shakes. It's in how you love, fully, imperfectly, unguardedly, without needing to possess or perform. This kind of love transcends category. It's not romantic or platonic or professional. It's soul deep. It's presence based. It's the kind of love that sees beyond roles and into essence. And when you start seeing others through that lens, when you look past the mask, the defenses, the conditioning, you begin to see yourself with more compassion too. You begin to forgive the parts of you that once felt too much, the part that needed validation, the part that overgave, the part that hid to stay safe. You stop judging your survival patterns and start honoring them. You see that every part of you was trying to protect something sacred. And instead of abandoning those parts, you integrate them. You become whole, not because you fixed yourself, but because you stopped fragmenting yourself to fit in. Wholeness doesn't mean you never struggle. It means you no longer shame yourself for struggling. It means you meet yourself with tenderness when you fall short. It means you stop demanding perfection from a heart that was never meant to be a machine. You stop bypassing your pain in the name of positivity. You stop turning your growth into a performance. You stop chasing enlightenment like a finish line. Instead, you learn to sit with yourself, to breathe with yourself, to listen without judgment, to feel without fleeing. And in that deep, grounded presence, transformation happens. Not the dramatic kind, but the sustainable kind. The kind that rewires your nervous system, the kind that softens your edges, the kind that roots you deeper into your body, your truth, your life. And from that rootedness, you begin to build a life that actually fits. A life that feels like home, not because it's easy, but because it's true. And a true life is not a perfect one. It's a spacious one. Spacious enough for contradictions. Spacious enough for grief and joy to coexist. Spacious enough for dreams to evolve. Spacious enough for you to grow without outgrowing your values. Spacious enough to make mistakes and still be worthy. Spacious enough to be human. And in that spaciousness, everything breathes easier. Your relationships, your creativity, your sense of purpose. You stop clinging and start allowing. You stop forcing and start flowing. You stop trying to control the narrative and start living the story. And the story is richer than you imagine. Not always prettier, not always linear, but fuller, deeper, more textured. Because it's yours, authored by your own becoming. Not copied, not curated, but claimed. And when you claim your life, fully, unapologetically, you give others permission to do the same. Not because you said the right things, but because you lived it. Because you dared to be seen as you are. Because you chose truth over comfort. Because you stopped waiting and started becoming. And that becoming, That sacred, messy, radiant becoming is the revolution. And so here you are, at the quiet edge of everything you thought you had to be, everything you once clung to for safety, everything you outgrew without even realizing. You stand not in triumph or in defeat, but in something far more sacred: awareness. A kind of awareness that doesn't shout or demand, but whispers from the bones, from the blood, from that still place inside you that never stopped believing there was more to this life than survival, more than approval, more than achievement or applause, or the illusion of having it all together. And this awareness changes you, not in a sudden, cinematic way, but in the subtle unraveling of things that no longer align. You begin to feel the weight of things you once carried without question, and rather than pushing through like you used to, you finally pause long enough to ask, do I still want this? Not just the career or the relationship or the image you've built, but the story you've been telling yourself about who you need to be to deserve love, to feel safe, to belong. You begin to dismantle the scaffolding, beam by beam, story by story, fear by fear. And what you uncover beneath all that construction isn't weakness or brokenness. It's truth. It's your original self, untouched by the world's expectations, unpolished by perfectionism, unafraid to be seen in its rawness. This self doesn't perform, it doesn't explain, it doesn't apologize for its depth or intensity or the way it feels everything like a thunderstorm in the chest. It just is. And in that beingness, you find a kind of home you've spent your whole life searching for in other people, in other places, in endless doing. The beauty of arriving here, after everything, through everything, is that you no longer need your life to look impressive to feel meaningful. You no longer measure your worth in milestones or metrics or what strangers think of you. You no longer seek transformation because you think you're broken, but because you know you're sacred. And sacred things are always evolving. You are allowed to outgrow your dreams. You are allowed to rewrite your desires. You are allowed to become someone your past self wouldn't recognize, not because you betrayed them, but because you honored the parts of them that were never allowed to live fully. You begin to realize that healing isn't about going back and fixing what was. It's about creating space for what can be. It's about tending to your present with so much presence that the past no longer holds you hostage. It's about choosing love, not the fleeting, conditional kind, but the fierce, expansive, truth-telling kind. Love that says, even here, especially here, you are worthy. Love that doesn't flinch when the wounds surface. Love that isn't threatened by your power. Love that stays, not because it has to, but because it wants to. And from that love, a new kind of courage is born. Not the courage to conquer or dominate or prove something, but the courage to soften, to stay open, to be changed by what life brings. You begin to understand that real strength isn't found in how tightly you hold on, but in how gracefully you let go. You stop clenching your fists around outcomes and start trusting the wisdom of the unknown. You stop trying to control every narrative and start becoming the author of your own. Not the version others expect, but the one that feels like truth in your bones. And the more you live from that place, the less you need your life to fit into anyone's box. You become the kind of person who doesn't need to be the loudest in the room because your presence already speaks. You become someone whose depth can't be summarized in a bio or a title or a curated identity. You become someone who doesn't fear being misunderstood because you no longer misunderstand yourself. And that clarity, that rootedness, that wholeness, those are the real milestones. Not the things you can post about or point to or prove, but the things you carry quietly in your body, in your choices, in the way you love when no one's watching. Because in the end, it's not the noise of your achievements that matters most. It's the silence of your integrity. It's how you show up when the lights are off and the audience is gone. It's whether your inner life matches your outer one. It's whether the person you are in private would recognize the one you present in public. It's how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. It's how you honor your word when it's inconvenient. It's how you move through the world when no one is clapping. And these are the things you start to value deeply once you stop trying to impress and start trying to live. You stop chasing a life that looks good and start cultivating one that feels good, not just on the outside, but all the way through. You don't need to escape your life to feel free. You need to inhabit it more fully. You need to listen to the cues your body has been giving you for years. You need to take off the masks you've worn so long they've become skin. You need to choose yourself again and again until it's no longer a radical act, but a natural one. And yes, it will cost you. The truth always does. You will lose some things along the way, some illusions, some relationships, some versions of yourself that were built for survival, not truth. But what you gain is beyond measure. You gain peace, the kind that doesn't leave when circumstances change. You gain joy, the kind that bubbles up from within, unprovoked and unapologetic. You gain self-respect, not because you did everything right, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. You gain trust in the unfolding. You gain presence in your own life. And most importantly, you gain yourself, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. A you who can be with the full spectrum of life, the beauty and the brutality, the delight and the disappointment, the wonder and the wound, without shutting down. A you who no longer needs every moment to be pleasant in order to be present. A you who knows how to hold space for the full, messy, glorious human experience. This is what freedom really is. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of self. The capacity to be with what is, while still holding space for what could be. The ability to walk through the world unarmored, unashamed, and unafraid of your own becoming. To speak when it's easier to stay silent. To rest when the world says hustle. To stay soft in a world that rewards hardness. To say no with grace and yes with intention. To ask for what you need without apologizing. To own your story without explaining it. To begin again as many times as it takes. To trust that your life is not behind schedule. That your path is not a mistake. That your timing is not broken. That you, exactly as you are not too much, not too late, not falling behind, but right on time, in the rhythm of your own sacred unfolding. So let the final truth land gently, without urgency, without noise. You do not have to become anyone else to be worthy of your own life. You do not have to chase a single thing to belong here. You do not have to win, prove, strive, perfect, impress, or perform. You only have to return. Return to the place inside you that remembers how to breathe. Return to the voice that never left, even when you ignored it. Return to the body that carried you through the storms, the nights, the wars. Return to the stillness. Return to the present. Return to yourself. Not because you were lost, but because you finally realized there's nothing outside of you that can offer what you've been seeking within all along.